Okay, well, I just want to welcome Ryan O'Sullivan to this podcast. I must say, I've been really looking forward to it because I've been aware of some of the work Ryan's been doing around relationship mapping, relationship development, relationship capital. And our background, actually, our history goes back some time. I first met Ryan when I had finished my doctorate, and Ryan was in the last throes of finishing his. And we both share a really common interest. So this podcast is going to be a converging of two sort of I guess, or mainly Ryan's though, research-led initiative around relationship management. And what we normally do before we get started is just do a quick introduction. So I'm going to ask Ryan if you wouldn't mind just saying a quick hello and perhaps giving us a little synopsis of your background to date.
Yeah, hi Phil, and thank you welcoming me to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've been looking forward to it as well. So, by way of introduction, I currently work for a relationship mapping software company called Introhive. Been there be 5 years in January. Prior to that, I was with Infosys. So for 8.5 years, worked out of the UK. Managing some of the big deals that we worked on, and I started in the new business space. Prior to that, I had various different new business type of roles, and I think if I just to come from the other direction and talk about my academic work from leaving school. So, grew up in Leicester in the UK. Did my bachelor's degree, finished that in Holland, and as part of that, I worked in Bergen in Norway as part of that initial bachelor's degree. I did my MBA in Toronto, so I spent nearly 3 years out there and started my career, if you will, in financial services, funnily enough, so not necessarily sales. I worked for a mutual fund company out there, and been quite lucky to work and live in different countries. I've worked in Mauritius. I currently live in France, in the south of France, close to Nice. So I had quite a rich and varied experience, I think, through the years since leaving Leicester, so 25 years ago.
So Leicester doesn't draw you back, does it?
It does. I have a kindred spirit with Leicester, so very proud Leicestonian for many reasons.
Okay, well
So I
done.
tend to go back when I can. Doesn't happen as often as I'd like, but my parents are still there. My sisters live down in London. My brother's still there, and I have lots of friends from growing up. And actually, funny you should mention that, because part of the reason why I wanted to research relationships and understand, look, what is a quality relationship is linked to my roots in Leicester, because, as I say, I left as a student for my bachelor's degree, studied partially in the UK, and then transferred out to Holland. But even though time would pass, sometimes, years, and I mean, more recently, many years could pass before I see people, but I always had like a very strong connection with friends and people I grew up with. And it always fascinated me about how can you maintain this strong connection? What is it that categorizes and quantifies what is a strong relationship? And this is obviously on a personal level. And I've got friends that I grew up with. And funnily enough, just 2 weeks ago, we had our 30-year school reunion from when we finished our secondary school. So saw a few old faces then. It's not quite the same connection as people I grew up within my neighborhood, but that always fascinated me, actually, and it probably set me on the path to really understanding this whole space better, and shifting it to the B2B world has been a bit more lucrative for me and others. So
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I didn't expect to get that connection back to Leicester, but Ryan, that's a brilliant segue, I think, into our topic. So well done on that. I think as a starting point, it would be just good to talk about your PhD and again, just to give the listener some more context, because I think as we start to talk about this topic of relationship management, you are probably one of the world's leading experts in relationship mapping. Not that many people have studied it to the extent that you've done, and then since written a book that's coming out quite soon that we'll talk about later. So why did you decide to embark on a PhD looking at this topic of relationships and relationship capital?
Yeah, so this links to my time at Infosys, as I mentioned. In case people aren't aware, they're a global IT services firm at the time, about 250,000 employees, but probably added another 50 or 100,000 to date. So a huge company, and I was working in the new business team. And really, back, like I say before, back to this theme of relationships and understanding relationships. When you have a huge company like that, they have many existing clients across the world. And as a new business person, you're looking for opportunities to have new, fresh conversations. And I very quickly realized, I say quickly, it's probably took me a while, but I wish it was quicker, but I realized that when you have an existing relationship with someone, it makes the whole new business process a hell of a lot quicker. For many reasons, but I was doing some analysis of Boolean searches on LinkedIn, and just came to understand that, look, this is really the right approach when it comes to, or at least the first approach to take when it comes to trying to generate new business. And I had a serendipitous conversation with a lady called Lillian Clark. She worked at Portsmouth University, and I wasn't actively pursuing a PhD, or mine's actually a DBA, a doctorate in business administration. There's a technical difference, but it's the same degree in effect.
Mhm.
So I was chatting to her about my role and the fact of how we work on big deals, and she said this would actually be a fascinating subject for doctorate research. It's very rare that we get this type of insight from someone working at a global corporation, and that's what piqued my interest. So she helped me go through the application process, and then I came to meet Beth Rogers, who has been very close with Beth since that time, and that's what set me on the journey. And I wasn't too sure what to expect from a doctorate. I wouldn't consider myself to be particularly academic by nature, but it was a huge learning curve for me, and a very rewarding experience.
I know that we're not going to spend too much time talking about the doctorate because you have in fact been on a previous podcast with us where we've gone into the topic in slightly more detail. But I think that if one is looking at the way you've sort of transitioned your thinking and forward looking actually into the book that's coming out quite soon, is that the shift with the doctorate was very much based on looking at the quality of relationships that are built and what are some of the factors that help build quality. Whereas what you're now looking at is the whole sort of mapping exercise kind of process. How do you start to in a way do a sort of territory plan of the relationships that you've got as they relate to key accounts or large business opportunities? But I just coming back to your PhD just briefly, perhaps. The reason why I've been following Ryan's work so closely is that both my doctorate in the values that customers look for from salespeople and Ryan's research into what builds quality relationships absolutely come together really quite closely and very much kind of linked to the values and beliefs that we believe salespeople need to have in order to be high performing. Um, but why, I suppose the central question is, why do relationships matter? Because there has been some research in the past which suggests that perhaps relationships aren't quite so important as other dimensions of trying to grab people's interest. But for you, why do you think relationships matter so much?
Well, I mean, I would argue against uh, whatever research that you're suggesting or pointing to there, Phil. Certainly, from my own research, relationships do matter. We all know that instinctively in our own day-to-day life. We're seeing that pervasively more recently with reviews and things like that from sort of people leaving reviews on different sites about what people have to say, individuals. But if you think specifically in the B2B world, relationships certainly do matter when it comes to broadly speaking about our clients. Perhaps if we're thinking from our client's perspective, on a B2B perspective, we think about their suppliers, we think about their partners, and that can actually be a differentiator, and is a differentiator in their success. Because if we think about how the relationship they have with their suppliers and partners impacts their ability to perform and outperform their competitors and deliver to their mandate to their shareholders, which is to grow revenue, to grow their market share, to grow profits, that's all dependent on them having successful relationships, whether it's about reducing their costs, reducing delivery times of their products and services, improving the customer experience. All of these things come to play from bringing to bear successful relationships with suppliers and partners. And that in itself is a reason why relationships matter for our clients. And then from our perspective as supplying clients, obviously we get to benefit from that because we're delivering a service to them, and then it becomes a bit stickier. We've got a lot more skin in the game, I guess. There's shorter sales cycles when we're planning to sell to those specific clients, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that suppliers, the clients are prepared to pay more for a service that they get that they can trust. So that's where the two converge. But then if I just step out a bit and just think about why relationships matter from a data point perspective, you can think about say, if you just try and join a few things together. So this is a slide that I tend to present when I'm talking to professional services firms. And I remember presenting to a senior executive at one of the big four, and he was presenting to his team about the value of leveraging relationships. And I showed some statistics. One of them was that people where satisfied clients are 86% of satisfied clients are prepared to make a recommendation or an introduction for you. Things like that. And then when you think about when you're meeting someone, they're 5 times more likely to meet you via an introduction. And I would argue it's even more than that in today's world, when we see a lot of other ways and means to do cold outreach. And there's a bunch of other statistics that support the case there, where if there's trust in the relationship and there's an existing relationship, it moves 30% faster. And one statistic that I really appreciate is if you're the first person to go to a senior executive with the right solution, you're going to win 74% of those opportunities. So that's winning 3 out of 4 opportunities. So you need to be first there. So you need to have the route to that individual. And obviously you need to have the right proposition. And that all leads back to, how do you build a relationship? And I mean, back to my doctorate research, I guess, is understanding what is important to clients. And I think that's where you hinted at it before about your doctorate research and mine. And we won't go into a lot of it today, but it's really about understanding what are the priorities of clients and aligning to that, and not being a salesperson trying to sell things. So if you come to the table with that premise in mind, and then you're leveraging relationships to get to the right people and present the right solutions, then I'd find it very difficult to argue against the fact that relationships very much do matter.
Yeah, well, I think we're both singing from the same hymn sheet, Ryan, in that sense. So let's move on from that particular question, because I want to bring some more context, background to our conversation about relationships. And I was introduced a number of years ago to the work of Dunbar, an anthropologist at Oxford University, and he'd come up with this concept of the number of relationships that we can how many relationships can we manage at any one time? And the Dunbar number, it's something is cited not just through the study of monkeys, but related to how many people can have really sort of close relationships on FaceTime, and we've got all these wonderful technologies, but he argues that the number is actually quite small at any time. So we've got a finite number. I can't remember whether is it 140 or something like that. 145 was the number that he came up with, and his research is actually quite interesting because it goes back into social history and the sort of numbers of people that can live in villages where once you got above that number, it became much more difficult to contain a social system because just because it became more complex. Let's now sort of move on to some of the work of Gartner and the insights that they've given on the number of people now that are involved in making purchasing decisions, and that number has greatly increased. And I think the latest research that they came up with is roughly sort of 6.8 people are involved in a B2B purchasing decision now. Many of those people are not in what you would call traditional hierarchies of decision making. They could be sourced from different functions of a business, and they're quite agile groups. So they come and go, depending on what the project is. So if we take into account the number of people that we can realistically keep in contact with and manage from a relational point of view, the temporal nature of the way decisions are made inside the organizations that they work in, the science of actually how you manage relationships with big global accounts, like you were mentioning earlier, Ryan, is really quite hard. The science is important, and I guess, and quite hard to do because you've just got so many people. You don't quite know which projects are going to be important to a client potentially. You don't know who's going to be involved in making those kind of decisions. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts around the nature of how companies make purchasing decisions and how that links back to this topic that we're talking about, which is relationship management, I guess.
Yeah, so there's quite a few things in there, Phil. So I guess from the Dunbar number, just from our previous chats on this, and I've done a bit of thinking on it as well, there's a few different aspects to that, I guess, which is how many people can you maintain an ongoing relationship with, if you will? And I accept that fact. Obviously, there's a finite number of people that you can do that with. And what you might tend to realize is that you've got family, friends, your network, but then you've got your work colleagues,
Yeah.
and clients that you're engaged with on that given any given day or time, whatever your position is at that moment. But as you start to shift around, if you think about, I mean, back to my Leicester example, I've got friends and a network there that I don't actually maintain a relationship with on an ongoing basis. It's a bit easier now with Facebook and different things, but to all intents and purposes, there's no ongoing relationship. But they are strong relationships of mine. And if I look back through my career, and I'm sure anyone can, listeners can, if you go back 10, 20 years through your career, there are people who you consider that you have strong relationships with. And if you pick the phone up or drop them a message on LinkedIn, they would be there for you, and you would reminisce about the old times and have a good chat and rekindle that relationship, if you will. So I think sometimes there's a catalyst for rekindling an existing relationships. You've got that relationship capital that exists that is not activated. So that I think is that relationship capital is very powerful, very strong, and lays dormant. So it's interesting to think how you can measure that. So if you can do that in different ways with LinkedIn, and you and I have talked about this in the past with relationship capitalization. But then, so that's one aspect to it. And then if we think about the how the buying journey has changed, I guess it's become more complex. This links to my shift, as you put it, from relationship quality or measuring the quality of relationships to relationship mapping, because that is the gap. And I've got enough books behind me that talk about the definition of trust and how to build relationships. And that was the theme I was building through my doctorate. What I realized is it was almost like a Me Too element to how you define trust and the different components of trust. But the gap in B2B sales, in my personal opinion, is the mapping of relationships. And when you understand that, I think then you can do something about it. So think about a key account or think about a key deal. The priority for me is identifying who the key stakeholders are on that deal or within that account, and then doing something about it. So if you don't know who the individuals are, how can you influence them, for want of a better phrase? How can you support them with their priorities? So that is the priority, I think, initially, is to understand who those executives are. And you talked about 6 point something, and I think the deals that I've been working on in the past, I've got relationship maps with 30, 40, 50 executives, and that's pretty standard. So it's a complex process to identify them, research them, understand the engagement strategy. And as you quite rightly hinted at, it's not a question of an account manager managing 6.3 or whatever it was, or 20 or 50 executives. It's a team effort, isn't it? So it becomes a case of how do you multi-thread this? How do you manage this effectively? And I think it's the orchestration. So I guess the role of an account manager or someone managing a deal is more of a maestro of a concert, or a director of a film who's understanding the different roles. And you talked about the different roles on the client side. They may not want to talk to an AE or a sales person. They might want to talk to a technical person, but that doesn't happen by accident. You need to orchestrate that and engineer those opportunities to bring in the right people. So I think it's the complexity of how these deals are unfolding needs to be matched with the right level of depth and planning and analysis on our side of the table.
Yes, I'd love to go into the sort of relationship mapping in more detail with you, because I know that it's the core of the book that's coming out. But I just want to also extend this concept of relationships between it's not necessarily between a supplier and a customer, but it can also go into customer and customer, in the sense that the ability of an account manager to connect two customers together who have a mutual interest in achieving a certain goal, where you as the supplier may not be the involved in that particular opportunity, can go a long way to actually helping you with both of those customers to develop a stronger relationship. And so when we start to look at relationships, and it's not just the supplier customer canvas, if you like, that you're painting on. It's actually looking at the entire ecosystem. And I think that those salespeople that can see connections between people and between companies and effect introductions, going back to your point, it's so much easier to start a new conversation if there's been a personal introduction, but being a conduit of connections, a conduit of relationships, can also stand you in quite good stead when it comes to either of those organizations sort of reconnecting with you, because they can, they appreciate the work that you've done, and at some point, it may come back to benefit you with each of those clients. I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that nature as well.
Yeah, you used a great term there, Phil, ecosystem, and I think that is the right thinking to adopt in the modern world. And I will relate back to my PhD. There was through the process of building a relationship, this is the research I did. There's a term that is described. It's called mutual disclosure. So before trust is built, obviously you're meeting someone for the first time. They don't know you, you don't know them, and then you want them to trust you. So there's a phase between that initial meeting and trust forming called mutual disclosure. And there's three real elements to it. And it's about not selling to them, not feeling as though you're trying to sell to them. There shouldn't be a clash of personalities. Obviously, if you click, great, but shouldn't be a clash of personalities. But the key factor here is your knowledge, your expertise in enabling them to be successful. And what I presented in my research was those three things combined are the initial emergence of mutual disclosure, and then this person will start to understand that you can help them and start to share some of the things that are important to them and start to build trust, which will come as phase two. But that really links to how you're able to build those relationships. And I think with that innate understanding of what clients are looking for, if you're then able to then point them to specific individuals that may be able to help them, they will perceive you as someone who is very well connected in their industry. And again, you're elevating yourself in their eyes as, you know, the famed trusted partner or a consultative type relationship than just another sales guy. And I think your research and mine came up with very similar statistics and sort of disdain, if you will. My research, I interviewed CXOs from global corporations and asked them about the best person that they've ever worked with in their career. And throughout those interviews, there was a real disdain for the average salesperson, as they would describe them as, and the proportions of average versus the good was literally 9 out of 10 are average, interested in selling their products and all this type of stuff. So if you want to distinguish yourself as being different, you have to operate on a different level, and you've got to leave your sales quota and your particular objectives in your role to one side and really think about how you can help the client achieve their objectives. And I think yours will follow naturally from there, but it's got to be in the right sequence, and certainly introducing them to executives that they respect or working in companies that they consider to be peers is a fantastic way to build your own credibility as part of the general process of relationship building.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's sort of move on, if you like, to the new focus that you've had around relationship mapping. And must admit, when I picked up your book, and I'm very proud to be sort of, you know, to give us an endorsement. So, as well, because I think it's a brilliant book on relationship mapping, and I think it you know, the detail through which it provides ideas and clues and frameworks in terms of actually how to better map relationships and how to go about it, not just from a mapping point of view, but also how to progress into conversation. But one of the things that you refer back to is the work of Moreno, if I've pronounced his name correctly, and ONA and organizational network analysis, I think it is. And that was the first time that I must admit that I came across this person, this concept. So I wonder if you could go back to the work of Moreno and how that influenced you and in the writing of your new book.
Yeah, certainly. I think this is a fascinating concept to uncover. I think the listeners can do their own research. Organizational network analysis is a domain that's been around, getting on for 100 years now. But the principle of how different individuals and entities, for that matter, integrate within one another and creating this visualization, a sociogram, which is really what we're thinking about. When you think about LinkedIn and and Facebook. That's really what this is. It's a huge sociogram of how different connections are related. And we talk about Twitter with who's following who and things like that. So that's the explosion of that in the social media context. But way before that, it was really about understanding the dynamics of who's talking to who and how different clusters of people group together. So and explaining all of that. And there's a whole language that goes with it about homophily, like people that have the same type of interests. And there's a bunch of different things that explain why different groups actually collectively hang out together in that sense. So the first analysis was looking at different groups of people in villages, and how diseases spread, things like that. So there's lots of different applications to this outside of what we would consider to be mapping org charts, which is where I've taken it. But when you take that objective perspective at this type of insight, it helps you to understand the network itself. And one of the key parts around organizational network analysis in our context is about collaboration. So that's one of the areas that I've really taken this is to understand that the individuals, and there's research that supports this, emphatically around people that collaborate better, have a better network, are more successful in their role. And Heidi Gardner's work with smarter collaboration, her book with Ivan is sort of testament to this. And they've done the analysis as well to show that individuals that have a higher network, that can be internal and external, versus individuals that have a low network, perform 4 times better when it comes to generating revenue. So this is on an individual level. So that helps you to understand like the power of this network analysis, and basically the analysis that the mechanism they use to do the analysis is the organizational network analysis. So that in itself can give a great perspective on how you organize yourself, how you organize your business. And I challenge all of the listeners today to think about themselves in their own organization. Because often what you hear is your peers are often described as the people who do the same job as you. So if you're a global account manager, a salesperson, your peers are the other people doing that job. But I'd argue differently. Your team are the people that help you to be successful. So this is how well networked you are within your whole organization. So this is from your executives to the different teams that you talked about. You might have technical teams, you might have a legal team. So these are all the people that are supporting you to be successful. So that is the network that I would suggest people think about themselves in, and how well connected they are to the development teams and other parts of the business and in other parts of the world. And having this ONA perspective can help you to visualize that in your own mind and maybe compare it to others. And what the data says is the better connected you are internally, the more successful you will be. And that's why there's a lot of effort goes in from big companies that I personally work with, Big Four and others, that understand that, and they want to enable people to get better connected internally, because they know that's a pathway to success, but also harmony and lower attrition, mental health, things like that. So there's lots of other factors that can play a part in being better connected.
I think you're so right in that. And if I go back to some of the large deal opportunities that I was working on which I also reflected on as part of my doctorate, I remember sort of working with an incredible group of people. They were at the time at HP, Hewlett Packard, and there was one particular challenge that was put to HP with one of their large clients, which was that they weren't being innovative enough in the way that they were managing the outsourced IT relationship that I had globally, and they were in risk of losing I think it was a 900 million sort of deal because of this. So this particular this particular person decided that there had to be a complete shift in thinking about the opportunity. And what she did incredibly well was to leverage incredibly influential people from inside HP to come into a workshop to kind of do some brainstorming around innovation. The head of supply chain, board level director of HP, for example, was called up out the blue. No relationship existed, but she managed to get this person to contribute into innovation. The head of HP Labs was involved. We got very, very sort of interesting people. And when they came together in the room, they didn't quite know what they're supposed to do. They just knew a little bit about the client. And but what came out of this was an incredibly powerful and energizing sort of list of ideas, which then got weaved into a sort of value proposition back to the client. And even though sort of 80% of the ideas that came out of that forum didn't see light of day, if you like, 20% did. And it was because of that they were able to retain this sort of relationship. But the brazenness of the individual that made this happen has always stood out for me, and it links quite a lot back to the values that that we talk about, which is proactive creativity and tactful audacity, and having the ability to and confidence to be able to bring people together. But I think that underpinning all of that is a genuine interest and curiosity to actually make something better happen. And I think in no way could you say that any of the people that were contacted were not relevant to the topic that we had in mind. There was it was done with the intent to try and help their client and therefore themselves get to a better position. So it was delivered with a huge amount of authenticity and trust, which I know is the foundation blocks of relationship management. But I think it's interesting that you focused on the internal network, because I totally agree. It's sort of knowing what resources you've got and how you manage those and manage the relationships, which is so important.
Well, I
Sorry,
think
Ryan,
that
I've sort of ranted on a bit, but
no, that I might be going out on a limb here, because you mentioned she managed to get some very senior people from HP.
yeah.
Did she use sort of her internal relationship network to get to those people, or did she randomly contact them?
Actually,
I'm
do you
hoping
know,
the former.
probably a bit of both, but there was one, there was one. I mean, the fact that it was a hugely important client
Yeah.
was a reason for an exec director to take notice.
Yeah.
So I think she leveraged the risk of not succeeding with the contract to get sponsorship at that level. But there was I don't think she used any existing relationship in that case. But there were with others, so a bit of a mix, actually, a bit of a mix.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, it's George here, editor of the Sales Transformation Podcast. At this point in the recording, we had a little bit of a technical problem as Ryan suffered an unexpected power cut. Fortunately, he did eventually get his electricity back, so we're now going to rejoin the conversation a few hours later as Phil tries to pick up where they left off. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Okay, so after our technical hitch, it's nice to be back again with Ryan. I'm not sure if this will be part of the recording, but we'll see. But no, you were talking earlier, Ryan, about the importance of managing relationships internally. And it made me think of this particular opportunity I was working on with HP, and where they had a big outsourced managed services client that was threatening to switch to another provider, and they challenged HP to come up with something more innovative. And the lead engagement lead for this particular opportunity was one of the most brilliant people at leveraging incredible resources internally. Part of that was through her own networking skills and knowing who who to bring for this sort of innovation workshop. But actually, what she also did was actually reached out to the main board of HP, managed to contact the head of manufacturing, I think it was, in order to get that person to participate as well. So this was using, I think, proactive creativity and tactful audacity, coming back to my values framework, to actually make sure in that room for this innovation session, we actually had the best people. And so she had this incredibly good network, but also with knowing what the client's needs were, and then being prepared to be quite brazen in actually suggesting who should be at that meeting. And it was extraordinary, the innovation that came out of that session. So yeah, completely buy into the importance of relationship management and the sort of tying that back to managing internal relationships as well as client relationships. So Ryan, on that note, I'd love to now come into your book and perhaps go through the book that's coming out. Can you tell us what the title is? Can you tell us how you've structured the book and what you think the readers could get out of the book from reading it?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So you've kindly done an endorsement for the book, which was well appreciated. The title is Building B2B Relationships, How to Identify, Map and Develop Key Relationships to Grow Revenue. And it harks back to some of the things we touched on throughout the course of this podcast, where I mentioned the significance of building trusted relationships, and that forms part of the book in the beginning. But the crux of the book is filling a gap which I think exists across the business, really, which is how do we effectively identify and map the key stakeholders when it relates to a key deal, a key project, and more importantly, a key account. So that's the premise of the book, and it's broken into three parts. The first part is just setting the context and the stage as to why relationships are important, and there's 3 chapters there. The second part is my 3-step process, which is 3 chapters. I'll come back to that in a second. And then the third part of the book is bringing this to life. So I talk about how you can implement the 3-step process in the context of the use cases I just mentioned, which is key deals, key projects, and key accounts. So I go into a bit more detail in each of those use cases and have a case study or 2 in some cases, explaining how the 3-step process was put into practice. So that's the premise of the book and the basic structure. But the 3-step process in itself is step 1, which is identifying and mapping the key stakeholders when it comes to a deal. But I do preface that by saying how important it is to align to the priorities of the client organization and even the client individuals who you're meeting. I don't go into a huge amount of detail in the book because obviously that assumes that people have their own process in place and the right ways to capture that. But without that as a beacon, obviously nothing else will matter. So you've got to understand what the client priorities are. So that's part of step 1. But beyond that is right, whether it's a key deal or a key account, we need to identify who all of those key stakeholders are, almost like a relationship audit. So let's assume it's a key account. So who are the leadership? Who are the people you're working with? Who are the key executives that are responsible for some of the horizontal service lines you might be looking to have conversations with executives about? So you're basically building this profile of who all the key people are and getting it down into one place.
Ryan, can I interject here? Because I know with existing accounts and relationships, it's going to be slightly easier to do this perhaps because you can leverage your existing relationships to identify those that you should be talking to, perhaps you're not talking to. Do you have any advice or any tips in the book on what you can do to actually try and get to the people that you don't know and sort of identify the potential people that you need to contact?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a great question, and it links back to a conversation I was having just 2 weeks ago with the CEO of a $6-7 billion company. So, and he was giving this example in the context of it being an existing account. So it doesn't always need to be a prospect account. And he said one of the fears he has for his key account team is that you may have a huge organization like Fidelity or JP Morgan or any Cisco, these big global companies, and you may well be generating vast amounts of money, 5, 10, 15, 20 million dollars a year in revenue. But what can often happen is you're focused in one particular area, in one particular subsidiary of that huge organization. And I can answer that question in the context of his concern, which is, look, how are we able to approach this from a global perspective, from a parent company perspective, if you will, and whether it's a prospect or whether it's an existing account, the methodology is very similar in what I describe in the book and what I put into practice with our key clients at Introhive, which forms part of how we capture some of this data. But it all starts with the leadership. So you can often find that detail on the website if it's a big company. So you start with the CEO and you start with the key reporting reportees to the CEO as the basic overarching structure. And then you're looking for other external data sources such as ZoomInfo or LinkedIn, and through various means and methods, you start to build out that list. So this isn't at this moment actually overlaying any existing relationships at the moment. You're just trying to understand the structure of the organization. So what often happens is we research about the company at a high level, but if you get into the earnings, if you get into how they report their earnings, if you listen to the earnings calls, they'll talk about specific regions and they'll talk about the specific business units. And that's often how you'll find that they are broken up to. There might be a CEO of a certain business unit or a certain region. And when you understand that's how the company is organized, that's how you would organize, structure your organogram. At stage one, it's an organogram. So you're just trying to get a feel for the organization. And what I would tend to do to supplement that is using Sales Navigator, doing a search for the employees, obviously, at that organization. You can filter by C-level. You're taking a look down. And notwithstanding the amount of effort that goes into this, that's what's required, I think, just to put the hard work in, to gather the information, to basically get that initial org chart with some structure to it. So you imagine you've now got a feel for the CEO and the direct reports, and you can get a feel then from who's reporting to the CEO, which business units are important to the CEO. Then you're supplementing that with additional information from ZoomInfo, validating that from LinkedIn and Sales Navigator to build that out again. The next step there is looking at the service line. So if we're talking about this from a key account perspective, and this is the stuff we do with our clients at Introhive, is we will explain to them how we can integrate the Introhive data as part of this process by looking at the service lines. And I'll give you an example of the CEO I was talking to recently. They have 12 service lines. They're an IT services firm, and we're working with them across their top 30 accounts. So for each service line, you'll have a typical buying persona, and it could be data and analytics. So it might be the chief data officer, head of business intelligence, head of data, head of analytics, different types of titles that are generic for that service line. And the next stage on the org chart is to identify those people and put those in whether it's a placeholder in where they fit, but identify who they are specifically, the individuals as well. So you start to then build a map of the key people who are responsible for buying the service lines that you have available. And if you've got the different entities across, taking the Fidelity example, you might find that there's 4 or 5 different heads of data, heads of analytics for the asset management business, for the wealth management business. So you start to then get a footprint across the entire organization with your service line. So that becomes the blueprint, if you will, as to the potential routes for growth from your side. And then finally, you're starting to then, or as part of that process, you're able to identify where you have existing relationships. You may know the CEO already, so that would be covered. Some of those people you don't know already, you don't know yet. So you've got a view of who you know, who you don't know, where they fit. And this is step 1, as I call it, in is basically identifying and mapping these key executives on a key account level.
So what's step 2?
Yeah, step 2 is the research and intelligence gathering phase. So research is desktop research, and some of that you would have conducted as part of building step 1. So you found their LinkedIn profiles, you're looking at their Twitter profiles, YouTube, you're trying to figure out how open they are to share information and what they're saying, what they're doing, where they're located as well, and build an understanding of the types of things that are important to them. And that helps to gather a perspective on their priorities and also their personality as well. If you can capture some videos or different snippets of information, maybe some profiles of them, you're doing a bit more detailed research of their LinkedIn profile and other types of company profiles that may have been published. That's the desktop research side of the research and intelligence gathering. But the secret weapon, in my opinion, and something that I don't think is utilized enough, is the intelligence piece. So with AI, it's going to be a lot easier and easier to gather all this data around what's public. But for me, when you use intelligence in the context of my book, what I'm describing is how can you find out information about the individuals you're meeting through their direct reports, through other means, about the competitive landscape, about the different priorities, obstacles, things that are happening in the business. And that part of step 2 explains quite methodically how you can do that, and the systems and processes that are available to you with software like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Introhive, to capture where existing relationships exist. So it's not just about who can give you a warm introduction, in inverted commas. It's about how you can gather a better understanding of that business. And it does, again, link back to some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning about how to build a strong relationship with a key executive when you've come to the table, having done your homework, as they would describe it, having talked to their direct reports, having got a good feel for what the priorities are and the obstacles and the different programs that are running. That gets you an extra respect and credibility again. So I think that is the secret weapon that people can delve deeper into in step 2 is to gather that. But all of step 1 and step 2 has not required at any stage to contact anybody yet. So this is all preparation work.
Right.
Step 3 is what I call the engagement strategy. So that again comes back to some of the stuff we talked about how many people are now involved in the deal process. So you would have a strategy that you need to put into place to determine how are you going to engage with this organization. So you'll have existing relationships. Perhaps you've got some existing projects that are running in certain parts of the business. You've got a strategy in place now because you've identified who are the key executives in some of the service lines that are potentially relevant for that client. In this example I gave, they have 12 service lines. Obviously 12 is a lot, so maybe you focus on 3 or 4 that are relevant for various micro reasons. So then you're starting to build a relationship strategy of like, who do you want to target? How do you want to engage with them? What's the value proposition? How are you going to gather intelligence? You've got a feel for that. So then you start to do that. So you would then start to orchestrate the process to engage. So whether it would be through the friendlies, as you might say, people you already have communication with or in the past are familiar with, bring them to the table, have a right line of questioning that would uncover the types of things and take you into the right direction that you have, because you've got your plan in place as to who you want to actually engage with. So the point around step 3 is not to go charging in like a bull in a china shop, the proverbial bull, is to be methodical in how you take this forward. And you may want to get to the chief data officer. And one option is to randomly send him a LinkedIn message, which you're perfectly free to do, or send him an email. But what my book is championing is slow down. Let's get it. It might take 3 months to get to him or her. It might take a lot more effort and planning to get to that person in the right means and methods. So it's really thinking about doing things in a very strategic and thoughtful way. And when you have someone who you want to build a relationship with, to have them in mind and do the proper research to orchestrate that to happen in the right time frame.
I mean, what I love about the book is it's very methodical, as you just said. It sort of provides the tools and frameworks to cover each one of those sort of dimensions that you've just described. And I think that in listening to you talk about it, it's an investment of time, isn't it? It's not something that can happen that quickly. And that investment of time is something that, given the pressure of companies to meet short-term targets, sometimes they overlook some of these steps. But I think you would argue that, you know, these are absolutely critical steps of the process if you want to plan a strategy for these large opportunities or key accounts that you want to create.
Well, I think, look, you've really hit the nail on the head. You can do things in a quick way, shortcut, cut corners, blast out these email cadences. That's what everybody else is doing. And there's mixed results on how successful that is. But if you need to choose the right accounts to work on, obviously.
Yeah.
So you need to choose the right deals to work on. You can't do this for all the deals you're working on. It's not necessarily my book. This is just a process. This is about being thoughtful about how you manage your business. And when it's for a significant account, say your top 10, your top 30s, this client I'm talking about, we're working with them for the top 30 accounts. And in that scenario, there's a huge amount of focus on these specific accounts because they generate so much revenue on a per account basis. So it makes perfect sense to have a proper structure in place. And when you think about, you talk to a CEO of a $6-7 billion company, they want to grow their revenue the same as any other company. They want to grow revenue, grow profits. And when you talk them through the process about how they're going to do it, there's this philosophy nowadays to take this one firm approach to clients, isn't there? So that tends to be the way from a supplier side. That's what we want to do. So you want to take the best of what you have to clients, and what we often find is it's easier to focus on the existing clients and your biggest clients first. So that's where you can have the biggest needle moving impact. So
exactly. And you mentioned, is it Heidi's kind of book and Smarter Collaboration? And I think that's mentioned in your book, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And this idea of sort of incremental revenue growth, and it is very clearly demonstrated through her research as well. I think one of the things that we're beginning to kind of grasp is, how do you keep your brand and your name in front of all of those people that you've had contact with in the past, that there may not be a deliberate reason why you should engage with them. Yeah. But actually, it's the importance of actually letting them know that you still remember them, and also giving them a chance to know that they can remember you as well. So I think the whole interplay with account-based marketing and how you might develop contact strategies based on a deliberate sales-led approach, perhaps supported by sort of marketing to keep your brand in front of those people should something crop up that is off your radar screen for whatever reason. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that. To me, that's quite an important part of the conversation about relationship management.
Yeah, it is. And again, I think you've got the broader network, if you will. So there's ways and means, easier than ever to keep in touch with people in various means. You can do that through the platforms that are available on LinkedIn and others that prompt you to get in touch. But when in your scenario, I think back to what I was describing of identifying the key executives, and as part of the process of the research and intelligence gathering phase is to be methodical again, to go back and refresh and see what's happening, see what they're saying, and see if there's anything pertinent that you have that would be relevant to them. But also a point you mentioned earlier about the multi-threading. So it's not one person that's contacting all these people. You have to divide and conquer, if you will, not to use that sort of war analogy, but we're trying to figure out how we can serve these clients better, but we need to have people aligned to them, that aligned to their philosophy, their role. So if it's a technical person, it's the relevant person on your side that has that mind share and is able to relate to their concerns as well, and share things that are relevant. But it can't be forced, and it can't seem too obvious. I think you've got to let things be as well in some cases, and let sort of the business flow in its natural way.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm going to come for the final sort of comment back to something about why relationships matter. And I know that we've looked at this concept of relationship capital and the capitalization of relationships as a concept which features in one of the chapters of my book. And in preparation for this meeting, I want to just quote from David Haig, who's one of the world's leading independent brand valuation experts, based in the UK. Because I've asked him the question, for many companies, their clients are their most important assets, and therefore how we manage those account relationships is important. And I've always been intrigued by the link between relationship capital and the capitalization of key accounts. And this is his response, which is, I think, quite a nice way to finish off on, which is that he says the accountancy profession fully recognizes that customer capital is an asset, but is only willing to recognize it in the balance sheet post-acquisition, because International Accounting Standard 3 makes it compulsory to recognize all acquired intangible assets in the balance sheet. However, the profession will not allow the recognition of customer capital and other intangible assets in the balance sheet if they are homegrown rather than acquired. This is a major reporting failure which needs to be addressed so that these fundamental corporate assets can be recognized in financial statements. So I think what he's saying is that we've got quite a long way to go before the accounting profession begins to realize how important this topic is. We know how important it is from a sales perspective and a supplier's perspective, but hopefully with your book and perhaps with some of the commentary provided by people like David Haig, the work that we're doing, we can actually sort of raise the profile of relationship capital to another level. So Ryan, on that note, I'm going to thank you so much for your contribution to the podcast. In the show notes, I think we'll direct people to where they can get access to more information about you, and also the work of Introhive as well, which is amazing. And I'd just like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan.